Well, hey there, awesome art kiddos. How's it going this week? I decided that I've been sitting in my house an awful lot lately, and I wanted to do something that made me go to a different place. And I thought, hey, why not create a galaxy where I can imagine I'm on a rocket ship just shooting off into space. Look at that beautiful galaxy. This is made out of watercolor, a little bit of regular paint, and then the planets in the rocket I did with color pencil and cut them out and added them to your picture. Now, if you were wanting to do that, you could even do those in oil pastel, but I like the way they really pop out nicely because of the fact that they were cut out and added separately. All right, so let's talk about the materials that you're going to need in order to do this fun little project. For today's project, you're going to definitely want to try to use watercolor paper if you have it. If you don't have watercolor paper, try to find the heaviest, meaning thickest paper that you can work with. I also am using watercolor paints, any kind that you have. Of course, you need water and a paintbrush. And then for my planets later, I am going to grab some color pencils and scissors and glue. I also am putting in a secret ingredient today, which is table salt. I'll explain why in a little bit, why you might want to use a little bit of table salt. For today's video, I want to practice something called the wet on wet technique. What that means is I'm going to put water on my paper to wet it first, and then I'm going to apply some colors of watercolor on top. So before I even begin, I'm taking my watercolor paper and I am going to tape it down. It'd be better if you use painter's tape. I'm out of painter's tape, so I'm going to take a risk with some masking tape. That just will work too. Taping down my four edges is going to help keep my paper flat because when it gets water on it, the paper is going to want to curl up a little bit. And I don't want that to happen. I want it to stay flat so that it will dry flat. Here's a little handy tip that I like to do. Before I get started with painting, since my watercolors are dry, I'm going to wake them up a little bit. So I'm just going to take some water and just put a little bit of water on the colors I plan on using today. And since I'm going to make an outer space galaxy, I'm going to stick with my blue, purple, and maybe a little bit of black. I also notice I have some teal here and some shades of blue on this side as well. Putting that water on there will kind of start to moisten those paints up a little bit so that when I'm ready to put color, they're going to be ready to spread. All right, I'm ready to begin. Now, it would take a long time for me to wet this whole paper down with this small brush. So since I am lucky enough to have a pretty big bristled brush, I'm going to go ahead and use that to do my wet on my paper. This is the first layer. And I'm just going to go back and forth, putting water across. Once you've gotten that area wet, don't keep going over the same spot. That won't be good for your paper. You could eventually paint a hole in your paper, or you could even it's called pilling, when little bits of paper start coming up and making these little balls of paper. That means you're being too rough. Now that I have the water down on my paper, I can take my brush and let's just get a little blue here. Now watch what happens. See how it starts to spread right away and how it can kind of just dance across? So I'm just going to put some little areas of blue. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab a little purple. And it just spreads and blends so nicely. Watch what happens when you just put them all together. Look at that. Now, since this is a galaxy that I'm doing in outer space, let's put some black in there. Black is a very strong color, so you can see how it'll just completely cover something up. So you do want to be careful, because while I want a nice outer space sky, I don't want it to be just black. So I am going to try and work a little color in there. Notice I'm working pretty quickly. I mean, I don't want to take forever and let the paper dry, but don't feel like you have to rush and panic. I mean, you are free to kind of experiment and move some colors around a bit. Let's see if I put a little blue on top of the black. I'm getting, ooh, that's a nice midnight blue. See if I can zoom in so you can see that better. Yeah, getting some nice dark shades here. And I'm about finished putting all this color on my paper. Now I'm going to do one pretty cool trick. Let's see if I can go ahead and blend all this in, and I think that'll pretty much have it. Just let the colors kind of bleed and run. I can see my paper is wanting to buckle a little bit, and it's getting a lot of liquid on there. Now, while my paper is really wet, I'm going to just take some ordinary table salt that you would, put on your French fries, and just sprinkle a little bit of that across. Salt is going to want to absorb all of the color. So as it dries, it's going to have what's basically a chemical reaction where every little grain of salt or granule of salt that lays there is going to start to really soak up and make that color get very concentrated. So if you look very closely, you can see the salt is kind of reacting with the paint and drawing that color very close to it. Now when that dries, I can just simply brush the dried salt off, and I'm going to have a nice texture, which I think will go very nicely with my outer space watercolor. And one thing you want to remember is don't just take this and just dump it everywhere. Too much salt is not going to have the effect that you want. So little sprinkles. All right, so this is still not completely dry yet. You can see some little wet puddles, but look at the effect that the salt is having on all that watercolor. And it's really creating all these areas of little bumps that look like bumps in texture, but it's actually pretty flat. The salt will be easy to wipe off in just a little bit. Now I'm going to let it keep drying before I brush any salt off. All right, so now my Galaxy, the watercolor is dried. So I'm going to carefully start to peel off the tape. You don't want to pull too fast or you might actually accidentally rip a little bit of your watercolor paper. And if you're not using watercolor paper, you definitely want to go slow and be careful because, yeah, look, it even ripped a little of the cardboard up there. Ah! Almost free. Last side, and let's take a look at it. Look at that, so cool. Now that the salt has had enough time to really do its thing, you can see that beautiful texture. And all I need to do now is just gently rub any of that salt, just kind of get that off. Usually you can see my fingers get a little dirty too. This is a fun thing to do to create texture. And salt, you usually got that around your house anyway, right? All right, so now I have my Galaxy. All right, so now I want to create some stars. So I have some white paint, and I've added a little bit of water to kind of just water it down a bit, because I'm going to splatter paint. It's pretty watery. I hope this isn't too much. When you splatter paint, you don't want to just take your brush and go splatter, 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 because you're going to get paint all over your face, all over everything. So I'm just going to dip here into this liquidy wet and just tap. Nice gentle taps. And since the paint is very liquidy, I'm getting a pretty nice little constellation of stars here. I think that's lovely. And I'm just going to let that dry, and then I might add some planets. All right, so now I'm going to get a separate piece of paper, and this is actually leftover watercolor paper from when I cut my watercolor Galaxy paper down, and I'm going to do some circles to create some planets. I'm just going to do some different size circles. Don't want them all to be the same size. That way some will look like they're closer, some will look like they're farther apart. And once I get those finished, then I'm going to go ahead and color them in. When I color them, I'm going to use color pencil. Now, you could just as easily color with marker. You could color with crayon. You could paint them. You could do whatever you'd like. You could even use oil pastel and just draw directly onto your planet. Your galaxy whenever it's dry. Since I want to do a little bit of shading, I'm picking 3 colors that I think will blend nicely together. I have a light and dark red, and then I have a purple. And I think purple goes well with red because purple is made by mixing blue and red together. I'm going to put a little bit of purple on one side of my planet and realize that when you're coloring, don't scribble scrabble, but go back and forth in one direction, nice, even strokes with your pencil, and stay inside that curve of your planet. If I color about halfway with the purple, then that's going to give me a shadow on the side of the planet. So it has a darker side, and that gives it a little more dimension, so it looks a little more 3D. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and color right over with one of my reds. You can go right over that purple and continue coloring. And if you noticed, I rotated my paper so that the direction of coloring with my red pencil is going to go across the direction that I did with the purple. That's called cross-hatching, you guys. All right, so I'm going to keep coloring this in, and then I'll cut it out. All right, little planet, let's see how you look. So if I take my universe here, my little galaxy, and just say, hey, do I want this little planet right here? And I can just glue it down and make a few more planets. Here we have it, nice little outer space scene. I decided to add a little rocket. I did add one more planet because that gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, which is an odd number, and sometimes that just balances a picture nicely. So I hope you enjoyed it. So, boop. Is today's artwork out of this world, Ramona? Once again, you don't need to look at baby. I think that looks really great. What a fun picture. Ramona, do you ever think you want to go to outer space? You want to get on a rocket? Fly? Which planet do you want to fly to? Any particular one? You want to just stay right here on your bed, don't you? Yeah.